The master key clicked uselessly in my front door lock for the third time. Patricia Morrison's face flushed red as she jiggled the handle, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against the brass. "This is impossible," she muttered, pulling out her phone. 911? Yes, I need police at 12 Oak Street immediately. Someone has illegally changed their locks and is preventing lawful HOA inspection. What she didn't know was that the officer responding to her call would be my son Marcus. And what Marcus didn't know was that his old man had been 3 steps ahead of this game for weeks. Some battles are won before they even begin. I'm Robert Thompson, 68 years old, retired from the National Security Agency, where I spent 30 years analyzing financial crimes and following paper trails that led to some very dark places. My neighbors think I'm just another quiet retiree who tends his garden and waves from the porch. They have no idea that those same skills that once tracked international money laundering operations are now focused on a 43-year-old HOA president named Patricia Morrison. Patricia moved here 2 years ago with her teenage daughter after what she calls a fresh start from Portland. She's methodical, intelligent, and absolutely ruthless when it comes to neighborhood regulations. What makes her dangerous isn't her cruelty. It's her belief that she's doing the right thing. She sees herself as a protector of property values and community standards. But I see something else entirely. A wounded animal that learned to bite first. I sat in my Honda Civic, engine off, watching Patricia Morrison make her rounds through Meadowbrook Estates like a general inspecting troops. 3 o'clock on a Tuesday afternoon, the June sun turning my car into an oven, but I barely noticed the sweat forming on my forehead. There are things that make a person forget about physical discomfort entirely, and watching a predator stalk its prey is one of them. This was the 14th time in 3 weeks I'd documented her patrol pattern. Not because I enjoyed sitting in a hot car for hours, but because I discovered something that made my blood run cold. Every single family Patricia visited with her thick manila folder and professional-grade camera received an official HOA violation notice exactly 14 days later. The precision was almost military in its execution. Today's target was the Chen family at 47 Maple Drive. David and Linda Chen, both high school teachers, with twin boys who couldn't be more than 10 years old. I watched Patricia photograph their white picket fence from multiple angles, measuring the height with a small ruler, then scribbling notes in her leather-bound notebook with the intensity of a crime scene investigator. Her movements were deliberate, practiced, efficient. What possible violation could that fence represent? It looked identical to mine, to the Williamses next door, to every other fence on the entire street. The paint was fresh, the posts were straight, the gate latched properly. But I'd learned not to trust appearances when it came to Patricia Morrison's interpretation of neighborhood regulations. She had a talent for finding problems where none existed. My phone buzzed against the dashboard. Text from Marcus. "Dad, pulling a double shift tonight. 3 domestics and a robbery. Lock up tight and don't wait up for me." I smiled despite the situation and typed back, "Roger that, son. Your old man knows how to take care of himself. Stay safe out there." But the truth was, I didn't need my 35-year-old police officer son to worry about my safety. The skills I'd developed during 3 decades at the National Security Agency, reading human behavior patterns and predicting criminal activity, had never really left me. Even after 10 years of supposed retirement, my mind still automatically cataloged suspicious activities and filed them away for future analysis. I adjusted my rearview mirror and continued watching Patricia. Her movements were too precise, too methodical for a volunteer HOA president. The way she documented everything, the angles she chose for photographs, the systematic nature of her note-taking, all suggested professional training. Someone had taught her these techniques, and I had a growing suspicion about who that someone might be. Patricia spent exactly 17 minutes at the Chen property, following what appeared to be a predetermined checklist. She photographed not just the fence, but also the mailbox placement, the landscaping, the position of their garbage cans, even the small decorative garden gnome that Mrs. Chen had placed beside their front steps. Each photo was taken with clinical precision, as if she were building a legal case. When Patricia finally climbed back into her silver Lexus and drove toward the neighborhood exit, I remained parked under the old oak tree where I'd positioned myself. In my mind, puzzle pieces were clicking into place with an almost audible snap. I'd witnessed this exact scenario before, and the memory made my hands grip the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. 2009, Sunset Valley, Arlington County, another HOA, another set of increasingly bizarre regulations, another community of families being systematically driven from their homes. Back then, I thought it was just bureaucratic incompetence mixed with petty power trips. I was working 60-hour weeks at NSA, tracking financial terrorism networks, and I didn't have the time or energy to properly investigate what seemed like minor neighborhood drama. Back then, I was wrong. Dead wrong. And my failure to act had cost an innocent woman her home and her peace of mind. I'd carried that guilt for 16 years, promising myself that if I ever encountered a similar situation, I wouldn't make the same mistake twice. And now, 16 years later, I was watching the same nightmare unfold in my own neighborhood. The only difference was that this time, I had the time, the skills, and the determination to stop it before it destroyed more innocent families. This time, I wouldn't be an observer. This time, I would be a participant. Spring of 2009 feels like yesterday when I close my eyes and let the memories flood back. I was still commuting to Fort Meade every morning, my security clearance badge swinging from a lanyard as I disappeared into the world of classified financial data analysis. The work was consuming, intellectually demanding, and often depressing, following digital money trails that stretched across continents and often led to very dangerous people. Sunset Valley was supposed to be my peaceful retreat from all that intensity, a quiet suburban neighborhood where the biggest drama involved whose turn it was to host the annual block party and whether the community pool should stay open past Labor Day. How naive I was to think that evil only existed in the shadows of international finance. The problem started small, almost laughably so. Daniel Harrison, our HOA president, was a former real estate broker who ran meetings with the efficiency of a corporate boardroom and the warmth of a tax audit. First came the new paint color restrictions, limiting house colors to earth tones that promote community harmony. Then parking regulations that seem designed by someone with a degree in automotive engineering and a personal vendetta against anyone who owned a pickup truck. I remember thinking at the time that Harrison was probably just an overzealous perfectionist, the kind of person who arranges their sock drawer by color and feels genuine distress when things aren't properly organized. I was too busy tracking money laundering operations through shell companies in the Cayman Islands to pay much attention to what seemed like harmless neighborhood nitpicking. I remember the morning everything changed for me personally. I was standing on my front porch with my coffee, watching the sunrise paint the sky in soft pastels, when I heard sobbing from next door. Mrs. Eleanor Williams, a widow in her 70s who had lived in that house for 40 years, stood in her garden holding a stack of papers that trembled in her arthritic hands. Her voice shook as she explained the situation to me, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. $500, she whispered, her voice barely audible above the morning bird song. They want $500 because my roses are the wrong color red. According to this new regulation I never heard of, they're supposed to be pink. Pink roses, Mr. Thompson, as if the color of flowers could somehow damage property values. Those roses weren't just flowers to Eleanor. They were living memories of her deceased husband, Frank, who had planted them for their 25th wedding anniversary. Every spring when they bloomed, she would sit on her porch and tell me stories about Frank's gentle hands working the soil, his careful attention to each plant, his pride when the first buds appeared each year. Those roses were her connection to 50 years of marriage and the love of her life. I tried to help her fight it, applying the same methodical approach I used in my professional life. Spent my evenings crafting carefully worded emails to Harrison, citing property rights and due process concerns, researching HOA law and precedent cases. Never received a single response, not even an automated acknowledgement that my emails had been received. Attended 3 consecutive HOA meetings where I was told that emotional arguments don't supersede community standards and that I was disrupting proper parliamentary procedure when I tried to present Eleanor's case. Harrison ran those meetings like a dictator, using Robert's Rules of Order like a weapon to silence any dissent or discussion. That's when I decided to use my professional skills to dig deeper into what was really happening in Sunset Valley. What I found made me realize we weren't dealing with simple neighborhood politics or even ordinary corruption. Harrison had connections to Riverside Development Group, a company that specialized in buying distressed properties at below-market prices. Properties like the ones being forced into sale by increasingly ridiculous HOA fines and regulations. The pattern was elegant in its simplicity and monstrous in its execution. Target families who couldn't afford legal battles, create violations out of thin air, escalate fines until selling becomes the only option, swoop in with a generous offer through a shell company, flip the property for profit, repeat the process throughout the neighborhood until you own enough real estate to control the entire community. But when I brought my evidence to the next community meeting, attempting to present financial documents that showed clear conflicts of interest and what appeared to be a systematic scheme to defraud homeowners, I was gavelled down by Harrison himself before I could even finish reading my prepared statement. The HOA board doesn't entertain conspiracy theories or unfounded accusations, he announced with the authority of a judge. "Mr. Thompson, please take your seat or leave the premises immediately." The room fell silent. 30 families, all of whom should have been outraged by what I was trying to tell them, sat in uncomfortable silence while Harrison dismissed evidence of their own exploitation. Fear had already taken root in that community. People were afraid to speak up because they'd seen what happened to those who challenged the system. Eleanor Williams sold her house 3 months later, forced out by escalating fines that reached into the thousands of dollars. 40 years of memories boxed up and loaded into a moving truck because she couldn't afford to fight a system designed to crush people like her. The new owners immediately painted over Frank's garden shed and replaced his beloved rose bushes with regulation-compliant pink ones that had no history, no meaning, no soul. Before she left, Eleanor knocked on my door one final time. Her words still echo in my mind 16 years later. "Mr. Thompson, Daniel Harrison isn't evil in the way you'd expect. He doesn't scream or threaten or break down doors. He just quietly, politely, legally destroys lives. And that makes him more dangerous than any criminal you've ever tracked at your government job." 6 months later, my work at NSA required relocation to a different facility. I left Sunset Valley carrying the weight of my failure to protect Eleanor, promising myself I'd never again stand by while bullies destroyed innocent people's lives. But promises are easy to make and hard to keep, especially when you're not sure you'll ever get the chance to redeem yourself. Now, 16 years later, watching Patricia Morrison execute what appeared to be the same playbook in my new neighborhood, I understood that some promises are worth keeping, no matter how late you keep them. Eleanor Williams deserved better from me in 2009. My current neighbors deserved better from me now. Saturday morning found me in my home office, surrounded by printouts, legal documents, and multiple computer screens displaying search results that painted an increasingly disturbing picture. I wasn't looking for Patricia Morrison's current violations. That would be child's play for someone with my background. Instead, I was excavating the roots of her transformation from neighbor to neighborhood dictator, trying to understand the psychology behind her systematic harassment of innocent families. The basic facts were straightforward enough. Patricia Ann Morrison, 43 years old, divorced, mother of 16-year-old daughter, Sarah. Moved to Meadowbrook Estates in late 2022, immediately volunteered for HOA committees, elected president 8 months later by the narrowest margin in neighborhood history. On paper, she looked like any other suburban single mother trying to build a stable life for her child. But the deeper I dug into public records, court filings, and archived newspaper articles, the more complex the story became. Patricia Morrison hadn't always been the woman making my neighbors' lives miserable. In fact, according to what I was finding, she'd once been exactly the kind of person she was now targeting. A vulnerable single parent trying to make ends meet in an unforgiving world. The Portland Tribune article I found was dated March 15th, 2018. Headline: Single mother loses home in HOA dispute over flag regulations. The accompanying photo showed a younger Patricia Morrison standing in front of a modest 2-story house with blue shutters and a small front yard, holding her then 12-year-old daughter's hand, both of them looking devastated and confused. According to the detailed article, Patricia had been running a small licensed daycare business from her home to support herself and Sarah after her divorce from an abusive husband who had left them with nothing but debt and legal bills. The Maple Ridge HOA, citing residential zoning violations, demanded she cease commercial operations immediately, despite the fact that her business was fully licensed by the state and served other neighborhood families. When she tried to appeal the decision, explaining that her daycare income was the only thing keeping them from losing their home, the HOA hit her with additional violations that seemed designed to punish her for speaking up. The American flag in her front yard was allegedly 2 inches shorter than community standards. An oak tree damaged in a winter storm was disrupting neighborhood aesthetics. Most absurdly, a small section of her fence had faded from weather exposure, creating visual inconsistency with community appearance guidelines. Total fines accumulated to $12,400 over 6 months. Patricia couldn't afford legal representation while trying to restart her income source and care for her daughter as a single parent. She was forced to sell the house for 30% below market value just to escape the mounting penalties and avoid bankruptcy. But the detail that made my hands tremble as I held the printed article was buried in the final paragraph, almost as an afterthought. The HOA president, who had signed every single violation notice, who had refused every appeal, who had systematically destroyed Patricia Morrison's life with bureaucratic precision, was Daniel Harrison. The same Daniel Harrison I'd watched destroy Eleanor Williams and countless other families in Sunset Valley. The same man whose methods I'd failed to stop 16 years ago. I leaned back in my office chair, staring at the ceiling as the full scope of the situation crystallized in my mind. Patricia Morrison wasn't some naturally cruel person who enjoyed wielding power over her neighbors for its own sake. She was a victim who had learned the wrong lesson from her victimization, who had studied the methods of her destroyer and decided to become him rather than fight him. Instead of vowing to protect others from what she'd experienced, she'd chosen to become the very force that had destroyed her own life. She'd studied Harrison's methods, perfected his techniques, and was now implementing them with the cold efficiency of someone who knew exactly how much damage they could inflict, because she'd experienced that damage firsthand. My phone rang, jolting me from these dark thoughts. Unknown local number. I hesitated for a moment, then answered. Thompson residence. The voice on the other end was crisp, professional, familiar. Mr. Thompson, this is Patricia Morrison. I think we need to have a conversation. I looked out my window and saw her silver Lexus parked across the street, engine running. She'd been watching my house, probably noticed the unusual amount of time I'd been spending in my office, maybe even seen the glow of multiple computer screens through my window. I was wondering when you'd call, I replied calmly. I think you know why I'm calling. Someone has been asking questions about my past, requesting documents from Portland, making inquiries that require a very specific skill set, that someone has been very thorough and very careful, which tells me they have professional training. I walked to my front window, peering through the blinds. Patricia sat in her car with her phone pressed to her ear, and even from this distance, I could see the tension in her posture. She looked like a cornered animal, dangerous and unpredictable. "Why don't you come inside, Mrs. Morrison? This conversation shouldn't happen over the phone." "How do I know you're not recording this call?" "Because if I wanted to hurt you, Mrs. Morrison, I would have done it already. I'm offering you the chance to tell your side of the story." 5 minutes later, Patricia Morrison sat in my living room, her usual composed demeanor showing cracks around the edges like a mask that no longer fit properly. She looked around at my bookshelves, probably noting the collection of criminal justice texts, financial analysis manuals, and government publications that hinted at my professional background. "You're not a retired engineer, are you, Mr. Thompson?" Patricia said, declining my offer of coffee with a sharp shake of her head. Her eyes were constantly moving, cataloging potential exits, assessing threats, exhibiting the hypervigilance of someone who'd learned to expect attacks from any direction. "National Security Agency," I replied, settling into my favorite armchair. "Financial Crimes Division. Spent 30 years following money trails and behavioral patterns, tracking people who thought they were smarter than the system." Patricia's laugh held no humor, just bitter recognition. Of course you are." She opened her purse and pulled out a manila folder, setting it on the coffee table between us like she was laying down a poker hand. "I suppose you found everything. Portland, Daniel Harrison, the whole sad story of how Patricia Morrison became the villain of Meadowbrook Estates." "I found enough," I said, leaning forward to study her face. The woman sitting across from me was different from the cold, efficient HOA president I'd been observing. This was someone in pain, someone who'd been carrying a heavy burden for years. "The question is, what are you planning to do with that information?" Patricia's composure cracked a little more. "What am I planning to do, Mr. Thompson? You hold my entire life in your hands. You could destroy me with a few phone calls, ruin any chance I have of building a stable life for my daughter. So, I think the better question is, what are you planning to do?" I leaned back in my chair, considering my words carefully. This conversation would determine whether Patricia Morrison became an enemy or an ally, whether she doubled down on her current path or found a way to change direction. "Mrs. Morrison, I didn't investigate your past to blackmail you or embarrass you. I did it to understand why you're doing to my neighbors what Harrison did to you." For the first time since entering my house, Patricia's controlled mask slipped completely. Her voice cracked as she spoke, revealing years of suppressed pain and anger. "You have no idea what it's like to lose everything because some petty tyrant decides you don't belong in your own neighborhood. You have no idea what it's like to watch your child cry because she has to leave her friends and her school because mommy couldn't fight the system." "Actually, I do," I replied quietly. "I watched Harrison destroy my neighbor Eleanor Williams in Sunset Valley. She was a widow who lost her home because her rose bushes were the wrong color. I tried to stop him and failed. That failure has haunted me for 16 years. Patricia stared at me in shock, her carefully constructed narrative suddenly shifting. "You knew Harrison? You were there?" "I knew his methods. I knew what he was doing to people like you and Eleanor, and I knew I didn't have the courage or the tools to stop him." I pulled out my own folder, containing the documentation I'd prepared over the past 3 weeks. but I have both now. Patricia's hands clenched in her lap, knuckles white with tension. So, what's your plan? Expose me? Ruin me the way Harrison ruined me? Turn me into another cautionary tale about what happens when you cross the wrong person? No, I said firmly, meeting her eyes. My plan is to stop you from becoming him. The silence stretched between us for nearly a minute, heavy with the weight of shared pain and mutual recognition. Finally, Patricia spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. You don't understand, Mr. Thompson. These people, your neighbors, they have no idea how easy their lives are. They've never had to choose between paying rent and paying a lawyer. They've never had to explain to their children why they can't live in their house anymore. They've never had to start over with nothing because someone with power decided they didn't deserve basic human dignity. You're right, I acknowledged. Most of them don't understand that struggle, and maybe they should. But making them understand it by inflicting it on them isn't justice, Patricia. It's just trauma creating more trauma, pain creating more pain. You're not protecting anyone or teaching anyone valuable lessons. You're just passing on the hurt that was done to you. Patricia stood abruptly, pacing to my window like a caged animal. So what do you suggest? That I just forgive and forget? That I pretend everything is fine while people like Harrison continue destroying families? That I smile and nod and play nice while the system that crushed me keeps crushing other people? I suggest you use your experience to build something better instead of burning everything down. I joined her at the window, looking out at the neighborhood we both called home. Children rode bicycles on the sidewalks, families worked in their gardens, neighbors chatted over fences. It was the kind of community both of us wanted to live in. You have a chance to create the kind of HOA that would have protected you in Portland. Instead, you're creating the kind that destroyed you. Patricia was quiet for a long time, watching a young mother push her toddler on a swing in the small park across the street. When she finally spoke, her voice was thoughtful rather than defensive. What if it's too late? What if I've already done too much damage to fix things? It's only too late if you keep going down this path, I said. But if you're willing to change direction, there's still time to build something positive from this situation. Monday morning brought the confrontation I'd been preparing for since the beginning of my investigation. My doorbell rang at exactly 9 a.m., and I opened it to find Patricia Morrison standing there with her master key in one hand and her phone in the other, flanked by a man in an expensive suit who could only be her lawyer. Mr. Thompson, I'm here to conduct a routine inspection of your property following complaints about potential code violations and health hazards. Her voice was steady, professional, but I could see the tension in her shoulders and the way her lawyer kept checking his watch nervously. I'm afraid that's not going to happen, Mrs. Morrison. I stepped outside, closing the door behind me with deliberate calm. But please, make your phone call. I think you'll find the response quite educational. She dialed 911 with deliberate precision, her lawyer recording the conversation on his phone. Yes, this is Patricia Morrison at 12 Oak Street in Meadowbrook Estates. I'm the HOA president, and I need police assistance immediately. A resident is preventing me from conducting a lawful inspection using my master key, and I suspect he may have altered his property illegally. 25 minutes later, A police cruiser pulled into my driveway with lights flashing, but no siren. I watched my son Marcus climb out of the driver's seat, his face showing the professional concentration he always wore when responding to calls, an expression that shifted to confusion when he saw me standing calmly on my porch with my hands visible and no sign of distress. "Dad?" Marcus approached cautiously, clearly trying to process the situation according to his training while dealing with the unexpected presence of his father. "We got a call about someone preventing an HOA inspection, something about illegal lock changes and potential safety violations." "That would be me, son." I smiled at him reassuringly, proud of how professionally he was handling what must have been a very confusing situation. "Mrs. Morrison here believes she has the legal right to enter our house whenever she wants. I believe she's mistaken about that authority." Patricia stepped forward, her lawyer's briefcase in hand and a confident expression on her face. "Officer, I'm Patricia Morrison, president of the Meadowbrook Estates HOA. According to the community bylaws that Mr. Thompson signed when he purchased his property, I have master key access for emergency inspections and code compliance verification. This resident has illegally changed his locks to prevent lawful HOA oversight." Marcus looked between us, his police training warring with his confusion about finding his father at the center of what appeared to be a legitimate legal dispute. "Ma'am, can you show me the specific regulation that grants you that authority? And sir," he turned to me, "can you explain why you're refusing to allow this inspection?" Patricia produced a document from her briefcase with practiced efficiency, handing it to Marcus with the confidence of someone who'd used this tactic successfully many times before. But I was ready for this moment. I'd been preparing for it for weeks. "Marcus, before you review that document, you might want to see the original bylaws from when I purchased this house." I handed my son a different set of documents, professionally bound and notarized. "You'll notice that Mrs. Morrison's version includes several amendments that were never voted on by the community. In fact, they violate Virginia state law regarding HOA governance and homeowner privacy rights." Marcus spent several minutes comparing the two sets of bylaws, his police training evident in his methodical approach and attention to detail. I could see him noting discrepancies, checking dates, and cross-referencing specific clauses. Finally, he looked up at Patricia with a professional but skeptical expression. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to provide documentation showing when these amendments were properly ratified by the community. According to what I'm seeing here, these changes would require a formal vote and proper notice to all residents." The emergency HOA meeting I'd requested took place on Thursday evening in the community center, a bland beige room that smelled of coffee and years of heated neighborhood debates. I arrived 30 minutes early, choosing a seat in the middle section where I could observe everyone's reactions. Patricia Morrison entered with her head held high, but I could see the exhaustion in her posture. She'd clearly been fielding phone calls and questions since Monday's incident. The community was buzzing with whispered conversations about master keys, improper amendments, and questions about Patricia's background. "This meeting is called to order," Patricia announced, her voice steady despite everything. "Before we address the stated agenda items, I have a personal statement to make." The room fell silent. Even the air conditioning seemed to quiet down. 3 days ago, I attempted to exercise what I believed were legitimate HOA inspection rights. I have since learned that my interpretation of those rights was incorrect, and I apologize to Mr. Thompson and to this community. A few murmurs rippled through the audience, but Patricia continued. Furthermore, I am announcing my immediate resignation as president of the Meadowbrook Estates HOA, effective at the end of this meeting. Now the murmurs became audible conversations. Patricia held up her hand for silence. I am also recommending that the board review and reverse all penalty assessments issued in the past 6 months, and that we return to the original community bylaws that were in effect when most of you purchased your homes. Mrs. Chen, the woman whose fence had been photographed just days earlier, stood up. Mrs. Morrison, we appreciate your apology, but many of us would like to understand why these changes were made in the first place. Patricia looked directly at me before answering. Because I was once the victim of an abusive HOA in another state, and instead of learning how to prevent that abuse, I learned how to perpetrate it. I thought I was protecting this community, but I was actually becoming the very thing that had destroyed my family. The honesty in her voice silenced the room completely. An elderly man in the front row, someone I recognized but didn't know personally, raised his hand. What can we do to make sure this doesn't happen again? You can stay involved, I said, standing up for the first time. You can ask questions when new regulations are proposed. You can remember that HOAs are supposed to serve the community, not rule it. Patricia nodded at me gratefully. Mr. Thompson is right, and you should probably know that he's the reason I'm standing here apologizing instead of facing criminal charges. He had every right and every means to destroy me, but instead he chose to educate me. After the meeting, as people filed out in small groups discussing the evening's revelations, Mrs. Chen approached me. Mr. Thompson, everyone's calling you a hero, but you look troubled. Are you okay? I considered her question carefully. Mrs. Chen, Patricia Morrison isn't a villain who got caught. She's a victim who learned the wrong lesson from her trauma. Tonight feels like a victory, but it's also a reminder of how easily any of us could make her choices if we were pushed far enough. So, what's the lesson here? Mrs. Chen asked. The lesson is that justice isn't about punishment. It's about stopping cycles of harm and building systems that protect everyone, even the people who've made mistakes. 2 weeks later, I sat on the stone bench in our neighborhood park, watching Patricia Morrison's daughter Sarah play basketball with some local kids. The morning was crisp, autumn air carrying the sound of laughter and the bounce of the ball against concrete. Patricia approached from the walking path, looking more relaxed than I'd seen her since moving to the neighborhood. Mr. Thompson, do you mind if I sit? Please, I gestured to the space beside me. We sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching the kids play. Finally, Patricia spoke. I've been thinking about what you said, about building something better instead of burning things down. And I think you're right. Sarah loves it here, and so do I. Maybe it's time I learned how to be a neighbor instead of a ruler. I smiled, watching her daughter sink a perfect three-point shot. Mrs. Morrison, the fact that you can say that tells me you already have learned. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Dad, the HOA reforms you suggested are being implemented citywide. The mayor wants to meet with you about consulting on municipal policy. I showed Patricia the message. Looks like this story might have a bigger ending than either of us expected. Patricia laughed, the first genuine laugh I'd heard from her. "Just promise me something, Mr. Thompson." "What's that?" "Promise me that if I ever start turning back into the person I was 3 weeks ago, you'll call me on it immediately." I extended my hand for a shake. "Mrs. Morrison, that's a promise I'm happy to make." As we shook hands, I realized that sometimes the most important victories are the ones that nobody sees, the ones that happen in quiet conversations between former enemies who choose to become allies instead. The afternoon sun was setting behind the community center, casting long shadows across the park where children played without fear of violating invisible regulations. This was what justice looked like. Not dramatic courtroom victories or public humiliations, but quiet transformations that created space for everyone to belong.